Now, from Wish TV, your local news source, this is All Indiana Politics.
Good morning. Welcome to another edition of All Indiana Politics. I'm Phil Sanchez. We start this week with the shooting down of those high-altitude balloons over North America, including that suspected Chinese spy balloon. On Thursday, President Biden made his first remarks about the U.S. decisions.
I want to be clear. We don't have any evidence that there has been a sudden increase in the number of objects in the sky. We're now just seeing more of them, partially because the steps we've taken to increase our radars, to narrow our radars. And we have to keep adapting our approach to dealing with these challenges. That's why I've directed my team to come back to me with sharper rules for how we will deal with these unidentified objects moving forward, distinguishing between those that are likely to pose safety and security risks that necessitate action and those that do not. But make no mistake, if any object presents a threat to the safety and security of the American people, I will take it down.
Now, one of Indiana's senators says the Biden administration needs to work with Congress to find and fix gaps in America's air defense network. Senator Todd Young talked to our government reporter, Garrett Berquist.
Let's welcome back to the program Senator Todd Young. Senator, thank you for joining us.
Good to be with you, Garrett.
So you were in the all-Senate classified briefing on the surveillance balloon that was shot down. What can you reveal from that briefing about A, that balloon, and then B, the three unidentified objects that were shot down in the days that followed?
Well, one of the things we learned that I think is notable, it is now being reported in the press, so hoping it has been declassified, but it just pertains to the perceived intentions of the Chinese Communist Party with respect to the balloon. The balloon was originally intended to go over U.S. territories and the state of Hawaii, and it veered off course for whatever reason. That reason seems to be unknown, but it was found over the Aleutian Islands, of course. The president made a decision not to shoot it down, though it was over the United States. And the Chinese decided to be opportunistic, to use this opportunity to spy on American farms, fields, businesses, homes, and military bases, and ultimately was shot down. So this is obviously completely unacceptable to the American people. It should be unacceptable to all of our federal leaders, as it is me. We need to stay very strong on this and restore deterrence by sending a strong message to Xi Jinping that this won't be acceptable moving forward.
And to that point, what do you think should be the policy on these unidentified objects in our airspace going forward?
Well, the president has a literal army of support staff to help him develop a policy. That policy, of course, will be dependent on the assets at his disposal, at our country's disposal. Assets to see these objects and to take them down. Obviously, we do have the ability to defeat them, to deny the enemy's ability to fly over our airspace or near space territory and spy on rank and file Americans, because that just happened. But it's unclear the sophistication of our detection devices. So that's one of the things that I hope the president will address, and I hope he'll come to Congress if he needs either additional authorities or additional investments that might help us prevent this in the future.
We now know the Chinese government did send surveillance balloons toward our airspace during the Trump administration. Does former President Donald Trump bear some responsibility for things getting to this point?
Yeah, listen, this is not. This should not be a personalized or politicized event. I think any criticisms that we have, and I've had some, ought to be in furtherance of our national security. As we look back, where errors of judgment made, they no doubt were, as we look back and try and figure out why Xi Jinping wasn't deterred. Why was he not deterred from flying a big balloon the size of 4 buses over the United States of America? That's the biggest question. And then we need to remedy that so it doesn't happen moving forward.
What can you tell us about the 3 currently unidentified objects that were shot down in the days after the balloon?
Well, I can tell you there still remains a whole lot of questions about the nature of these objects and how we can prevent similar objects from appearing above our soil and how we can continue to, in those rare incidents where they do appear, shoot them down. We're also unclear, there's been some speculation that these were non-governmental, non-Chinese, but instead commercial or not-for-profit of some nature devices. Well, if indeed that's the case, who are the owners of these assets? If you owned a near-space asset and it were shot down, one would think you're monitoring its well-being. It's not inexpensive to put these things into the air, and we've heard from none of those stakeholders, to my knowledge. But that's yet another reason the president needs to clarify with his army of staff and advisors what's going on, what information or intel gaps exist, and how we can close those gaps moving forward.
I want to turn briefly to the debt ceiling situation. Many of your Republican colleagues say they will not vote for any increase in the debt ceiling unless there is also a plan for spending cuts. Is that worth the risk to the credit of the United States and the potential fallout from a credit default?
Well, let me reshape the question, and I'll answer that question with a related question at once. Is the president's insistence that he won't negotiate with anyone after the American people voted for divided government a reasonable position for the President of the United States when he's requesting legal authority from the Congress of the United States to borrow more money? I think his position is untenable, and I have long had a position that it's untenable not to pay our bills. But I'll say this. I think we need to use this moment of leverage to get some spending concessions. You know, the American people know that for a number of years, Washington has spent trillions of dollars on things we don't need, with money we don't have, and that has to be remedied. The president needs to work with Republicans in Congress to come up with a more fiscally sound long-term plan.
Medicare and Social Security have both been taken off the table. That's a pretty big chunk of the federal budget right there. How can we expect any meaningful budget reform if large programs such as those are taken off the table all the time?
I'm really glad you asked that question, Garrett, because I think it's been an abdication of leadership in a bipartisan fashion of failing to acknowledge to the American people what they already know. They know that Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid have been, the monies dedicated towards those programs have been diverted for other purposes by previous generations and the current generation of Washington politicians. And I've been talking about this ever since my first campaign. But too many people have been deceiving the American people. So let's begin with honesty. Then let's come up with a bipartisan plan to finally make these very, very important programs solvent. And we can do that in a way that brings everyone along. We got to make sure that our seniors, those who are currently retired, receive the sort of retirement they were promised by the American people through their elected representatives.
Senator Todd Young, thank you for your time.
Thanks, Garrett.
All right, coming up, we hear from Indiana's House leaders on a couple of measures that affect your child's education. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics. A measure to automatically enroll eligible students in the 21st Century Scholars Program has cleared the House. Meanwhile, lawmakers are set to take up a bill to ban teaching grades K through 12 about gender identity and sexual orientation. Here's the latest from House leaders.
This week we sent 1009 out with bipartisan support that kind of builds on our efforts to support women and children. House Bill 1002, Representative Goodrich's bill, cleared Ways and Means this week. Look forward to having it on the floor next week, where we deal with opportunities to create more flexibility and opportunities for work-based learning across the state for our kids. And we'll continue to work on all of our agenda bills. The health care bills will be coming out next week, and I think we've been working with stakeholders. House Bill 1008 will be in Ways and Means next week, and working with INPERS on that. And then obviously we're looking forward to next week and talking about our budget and what we're going to be doing and the investments we're going to make and the opportunity to kind of build on the success of where Indiana is right now. So it'll be an exciting week, and we'll look forward to the budget being a big portion of it. I think we're trying to find the right balance between parental rights and protecting kids, and I respect those opinions. I think that rhetoric is the rhetoric that gets used by groups opposing. I don't think it's hate, it's a difference of opinion.
What's it say to you that just now you passed this expansion of 21st Century Scholars, or rather mandatory notification of eligibility, unanimously?
Well, I was joking with Representative Harris. I thought we had a long debate for a bill that was pretty obvious. It's a good bill. Look, and I'm super excited about it. Expands. It goes a lot in line with House Bill 1002, right? It expands it just not for 2- and 4-year colleges, but for certifications and credentials. It's a good bill. Like, I think, we want to give kids as many options as possible. We want to give kids the pathways that they can lean into for their careers.
We're looking at the bills very closely. We'll have one on third reading on Monday. There's a lot of vagueness in there that I've seen. There's potential for more lawsuits with who you can bring a lawsuit against teachers and things like that. So it's wide open. It's very vague, and I think it's could put us down a very dangerous path here. But we'll and by the way. For myself, I know our caucus members, we've talked about the value of parents in a lot of these decisions with regards to kids' education, all those things. But we also want to make sure that kids are being treated fairly as well. And I do think that there's some questions there where we could be heading down kind of a dangerous path with the particular bill we're going to hear on Monday.
What's your reaction to the unanimous vote on the 21st Century Scholars bill?
I really appreciate the work Representative Harris did on the bill. And I know there was a lot of talk about this over the summer. I was thinking earlier today about being at a news conference back in the early 90s. My dad was a state rep, and Governor Bai came up, and he had some students there. One was wearing a T-shirt. On the back of it said all the things that you have to do with regards to attendance and things like that, the requirements. And when we talk about a well-trained workforce, educated workforce, these are the things that we have to do to make sure that our students are, if they want to, they'd be able to have access to college and a 4-year degree. Those are the type of things that I hear companies around the state asking for. Eli Lilly and others say, we need to shore up our college students and make sure that they stay here, retention, all those things. So I think this bill is part of that and will help.
All right, coming up, Indiana's best political team takes stock of another busy week. And welcome back to All Indiana Politics on this Sunday morning as we welcome in two members of Indiana's best political team, former Marion County Republican Chairman Tom John and our newest team member, Destiny Wells, Deputy Chair for the Indiana Democratic Party. Welcome to the family, Destiny.
Happy to be here.
Yeah, we'll start this week by talking education. We know lawmakers will take up a version of the Don't Say Gay bill on Monday. Destiny, let's start with you this week. Can Democrats get enough support to keep these bills from passing?
Well, I don't think it's just about Democratic support. I think it's the public at large. I know that the ACLU has members of the public who will be showing up to the House bright and early on Monday morning. That bill will start to be heard at 8 in the morning. And so with that bill, we are seeing a repeat of bills across the nation pushed forward by ALEC that attack the rights of the youth to be able to live their lives freely in public schools and not be cast aside and felt othered by our education system. So I am optimistic that they will be in full force on Monday to let the State House, the super majority Republicans, know that they are not happy with this bill.
Tom, your thoughts on this?
Well, I think, oftentimes you see a lot of discussion about bills before they ever go anywhere and then they don't go anywhere. Every legislator has a right to introduce bills, and oftentimes bills get heard and never heard from again. I think the business community will be important to the discussion too, along with both Republicans, Democrats, and community members, and we'll see where it goes.
Tom, are you concerned that Republicans are maybe in danger of going too far on some of these education bills?
I think anytime you're going before the General Assembly and making decisions that affect how we're perceived nationally, it's important to take a step back and say, okay, what's the line where we're addressing concerns by our citizens, but by the same token, not painting the state with a brush that's not one that's attractive to bringing in new talent and new companies.
Destiny, I saw you shaking your head in agreement.
I agree with Tom John on this one. And, we have talked a lot about parents' rights. This was something that was put forward by Attorney General Rokita. When he entered office, he came up with a parents' right handbook. And this is kind of the fruits of that handbook. And so we have certain parents who have come forward that think that marginalizing a certain part of the youth community is best for their child. But we need to be reminded that it is the community at large, the tax base that pays for these schools, and we have to do what is best for the community and not just for the wants of a minority of parents.
Well, certainly a divisive topic. We'll see what happens. I want to switch topics now. We heard from Senator Young about the president's actions to shoot down the high altitude objects. Tom, did his explanation make any difference for you?
The president's explanation or the senator's?
Either. The senators specifically, though, but either.
Okay. I think it's interesting here. All of a sudden in a week, we have 4 balloons, and looking into this a little bit, apparently we weren't looking for things before. That's a little bit concerning as to what else has gone on previously. I mean, I'm inclined to take our leaders at their word until they give us reasons not to, and I believe Senator Young is a great patriot and somebody who served our country both in uniform and well in the Senate. So I will take his words, but I'm going to watch with interest how many. Are we going to have 3 balloons a week now? Are we going to have other things that have gone on that we didn't know?
Well, Destiny, we should point out you've also served as well, and thank you for your service. So your thoughts on this one?
I think this is pretty straightforward in that NORAD has came public that it had a gap in its intelligence and surveillance, that it did not know about these aerial incursions that were happening. If people want to cast stones at President Biden's administration briefed the former President Trump's administration very recently, to include former Secretary of Defense Secretary of State. And so these administrations are trying to work together because these balloons were entering our airspace during the Trump administration, and we only now know. This is actually a great opportunity for some unity in the pursuit of better national security.
Speaking of the Trump administration, Destiny, former Vice President Mike Pence says that he will fight the subpoena from the special counsel all the way to the Supreme Court. Does this legal fight, in your opinion, damage his potential presidential campaign?
Yeah, he is walking a thin line. So lately he wants to be now known that he was acting in a legislative capacity. That's why he is fighting the subpoena on Article 1 grounds for speech or debate, saying that he was in charge of the Senate at the time, so he should not be subject. I think he needs to pick one or the other. Was he being the vice president or was he being a legislator? So he's going to use litigation to stretch this out. So I think the public should be optimistic in that they are talking to the vice president. You flip up, he's the only person left. But if it becomes a legal question as to whether he doesn't have to answer that subpoena because of that, then it's going to take some time.
Tom, 30 seconds, take us home.
Well, Vice President Pence is president of the Senate. That's clearly a legislative role. And I believe he has spent his career defending our country and our institutions. I think that's what this is about, is not legal wrangling or politics, but the institutions that he wants to make sure he protects.
Destiny, again, welcome to the show. We really appreciate having you. And Tom, always good to see you. We'll talk soon, and we'll be right back. Thank you for joining us for All Indiana Politics this week. Of course, we'll be back here next Sunday morning at 9:30. You can also find our podcast. It's part of the All Indiana Podcast Network over at wishtv.com. Have a great rest of your weekend.